Next podcast with Chris and Todd.
Well, hey, welcome back to the podcast. Thankful for the opportunity to just hang out with Todd. I mean,
it's good to hang out with you too, Chris.
I may not get to stand next to a better looking guy all week. And so I'm glad Todd's here. Whew. Takes the pressure off me.
I don't know about that, but thank you.
Tina paid me to say that.
Yeah,
so
I think so.
No, it's all good. It's awesome to dive in. You know, we talk about a lot of different topics, a lot of different things.
Mm-hmm.
And season 3 is going to hopefully bring just some even better content because hopefully we're getting better at this.
Hopefully.
That's right. And we've been, man, you and I have been going through some seasons of some different things with counseling and definitely wedding season's coming to an end.
Yep.
But man, I tell you what, one thing that never ceases to amaze me is just the conversations we have around grief and loss. And obviously, I do a number of funerals throughout the course of a year, and you as well do your fair share, which sounds really weird to say, like I do my fair share of funerals, but it's a reality of life, right?
It's part of our role.
Yeah, it's part of our role.
Leading people through those moments, but also I'd say on top of that, just leading people through grief.
Yeah.
And some of that can look like, it's not just death. It's, hey, we found this out, or dealing with medical issues, or this relationship that is no more, and all those kind of things. And so, and I think for us, just having to somewhat play counselor at those times, and helping people even go find, hey, you might need even more help on this. Because I'd be the first one to admit, it's like, I don't have all the answers for counseling, but I do think it's important, especially in the midst of grief, to go, do I have a spiritual perspective on this?
And I think so many times that, and even as many times as you go through it, we want grief to be in this box that like, hey, this is when things happen. This is what I do. This is how it goes. And that, you got to throw that out the window. That's never how it goes, because your response to grief, my response to grief are two different things. But I do and I was just even thinking about that this morning, like, what do you anchor yourself to no matter what is being thrown you at life? And it's so important for us to, as believers, to anchor ourselves in Christ. And you know, like Jeremiah talks about it, like we have a God that cannot lie, and he is an anchor for our soul, strong and trustworthy anchor. And I think specifically when it comes to grief and it becomes to dealing with all the things that life throws at us and how we process that, man, if we don't have an anchor, we're gonna get carried away. We're gonna get tossed around. It doesn't mean that there won't be waves and there won't be things, but man, to have that one thing to come back to in grief. And I know I'm not, it feels like I'm letting the cat out of the bag. That's it. But you got to begin there too. Yeah. So
yeah, if you don't have an anchor, I mean, just think of any storm you walk through, like you're going to go, who knows where you're going to end up.
Yeah.
And on some levels, who knows if you're going to make it in the sense of just emotionally, mentally, and even physically. But I would add on to that is like, you need that anchor. But sometimes we may have an anchor in our life, but we just avoid it. Like it's just like, I don't want to talk about it. I'm going to try to avoid the grief. I'm going to try to avoid the storm. And whether it's, I'm not going to talk about it, or I need to be strong for everybody else.
Yeah.
I've in midst of helping somebody with grief, it's been like, I just got to be there for my kids. Or I've got to be there for my mom or dad, or I've got to be there for the family, and I've got to be there for this friend. And I go, I get that. And there's a time for that, but there's also a time where you've got to sit in this and go, okay, but what am I feeling? What am I navigating? So I think some of those approaches, like, it's just an avoidance. Like, I can't handle blah, blah, blah. Like especially when it comes to funerals, like, I just can't handle being in a funeral home. I can't handle being in this. And I'm like, I get that. But sometimes, especially in Mrs. Storm, you've got to attach yourself to that anchor and go, I need to do this as much as this is so hard to do. Yeah,
it reminds me of, like, you know, the plane analogy, put your oxygen mask on before you can help anyone else, and make sure that because listen, somebody may be drowning, but if you're not ready to dive in there, or you're exhausted diving in there, you're going to get caught up in their stuff, or you're going to take that on. And sometimes that's not for you to take on that at all. And that's such, like you're saying, it's a dangerous place to be. And so we can get exhausted really quick without taking time to fill up, or get our cup filled up, or do those things to just sit and be quiet. But I also heard something this morning this morning has just been a wild ride of crazy. But just like this analogy was used, if if Rachel calls me and on the phone and I answer, who's this? And she's like, it's Rachel. And I'm like, Rachel who? Like, what do you mean, Rachel who?
She's
like,
going to be offended.
She's going to be offended. Like,
yeah.
because I know Rachel's voice, right? And we talk familiar. We're very familiar with each other. And we talk all the time, probably more than she wants to talk to me, but I'm the talker in the relationship. But the same is true in that relationship with God. Like, if we're not stopping and listening for his voice, to hear his voice and being consistent in that, when he's talking to us in the midst of that chaos, we're not going to hear it. And we've got to stop and pause long enough to be intentional with those moments, because life comes at us fast and life is intense. And 1 week it may be everything is going on with kids and you know, something's happening in the family, or the next week this is happening at work, or this loss happens here. And none of us are that good to juggle everything that comes our way when it comes to grief and loss and just chaos sometimes.
Well, I think grief can actually do two things for you, and it's got one side that's beautiful, and then the other side that's just really tough. The beautiful side of it is grief actually helps you remember those moments.
Yeah, absolutely.
That were good, that were healthy, especially when you're dealing with someone who passed away or dealing with a relationship that's no more, or just whatever. You can go, man, I remember those moments, and you do things that help you remember those
absolutely.
moments. That's grief. Grief is helping you in those moments. So I would go, you need grief in your life. Due to the world being fallen, we're all going to experience grief.
Absolutely.
It's not like you can avoid it. So what you do is you make sure, especially in grief, you go, man, there's been a lot of good moments.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to take time to remember these and hold on to these because these are special. But then on the other side of it, it's going, but now I'm going to miss whatever that thing you're going to miss now, whether it's a person, whether it's situation, circumstances, whatever, because it's going to change. And so what does it look like to change? And so in both of these, I think grief is the beautiful thing that helps us be able to navigate both.
Yeah.
And God goes, and I think theologically, I think it's important to understand when it comes to some of these moments and we're asking, why did God do this? Why did God allow this? I think some critical things to be reminded of, this is the spiritual perspective that's going on here, is one, God did not want a lot of these things to happen.
Yep.
Remember, he created paradise. That's what he wanted. He wanted humanity to pick him over sin. But as soon as we pick sin, there entered this fall. And with that came death and pain, along with just sin being involved in our lives.
And it's hard to press into those moments of like, what is God trying to do in this, or what is God trying to show me or grow in me in this moment? And it really is powerful. Like you're saying, like, God didn't want this. And the second part, I think probably where you were maybe go, God's there with you in this. God knows loss. He watched his son die on a cross and go through that anguish of saying, this had to happen. I didn't want it to happen, but this was the only way. And so God knows that loss. And I think sometimes we forget that God knows loss and the intensity of that, having to turn his back on his son because Jesus was carrying the sin of the world and the enormity of that sacrifice and the enormity of that decision. And for us, the one thing that I try to help people remember too is this is a season. This is not, you are not going to be in this forever. And there is, I mean, just like the cross wasn't the final thing. There was the empty tomb and the joy of knowing that wasn't the end of the story. This grief, this mourning, this loss is not the end of the story. This is hopefully maybe even a catapulting to something that is new and fresh and real. And
I think you recognize God can sit at this table with you because he understands what grief feels like. Because he had to go through something he never wanted to see. See his son die on the cross, see his son take on all that sin in the world. And he was like, I don't love this. But what I love about God is not only is he with you, he's also going, there is still hope. And there, you can push through this. You can overcome whatever these circumstances are. Because I do know this about God. God goes, I don't want these things. I don't want grief and those circumstances to define who you are. And so, and I don't think anybody in those circumstances is going, I want you to feel this for the rest of your life. No, I don't think that's the case. And so God goes, in the midst of this fallen world where it's broken and it's not awesome, God's going, you are going to deal with some things.
Yeah.
But don't let them define you because I am here.
Absolutely.
And so that's the part he's like, and being reminded this was not what he wanted to begin with, but he's going, but I'm going to make the most out of this.
Yeah. And I would say, so what are some of those steps out of those moments? Like, I think you have to surround yourself with people that are going to encourage you and speak truth into your life.
Yep.
Go into God's word. And again, that anchor of like knowing God's word and trusting it. But sometimes it's resources. And one of those resources that I don't remember the author's name, but it's called A Grace Disguised. And that was a book that was just told to me by a friend that was going through loss of his wife. And he and I have had some awesome conversations. But that book, he said, when I was ready to pick it up. Now, I think that's probably one of the craziest parts about grief. Well, you just need to get over it. You need to move on. Hold on. Again, there is not a box that a calculated process of following grief. But the one thing that I believe that is crucial, even though there's no set plan, you have to press into something bigger than you. Yeah. You have to press in something bigger than, and keep moving forward. Like God can handle your questions. God can handle your frustrations. Yep. And who are you running to when you don't know?
Right. And you need space to process that. Mm-hmm. And so I always encourage people, you need a pastor in your life, you need a counselor in your life, you need a support group in your life.
Absolutely.
And that support group can be family, but it can have a lot of layers to it. I think it needs to be family, it needs to be church, it needs to be just maybe a group that's walked through similar circumstances and being like, yeah, I needed that. Like I think of like groups that we have, like divorce care, like that can be a huge like just support system. But along with that, a pastor and a counselor in your life. But also God at the forefront of all of that. And I think, yes, people will help you, but God will ultimately help you. And God goes, do both. Like you need time with me, but you also need time with these people. And God will use all of that to bring about healing. And so those are the things that I'd be like, if you start in leaning into things that you may not want to do, I think that's the hardest part, because I think grief just kind of causes you to be like, oh, I'm tired. I don't want to take another step. I don't want to get up. And it's all those kind of things. But when you fight to overcome that, and you start to find some healing on the other side of it, you're going, this is so much better for me. Yeah,
because the enemy wants you to sit in that. He wants you to feel that, and like there isn't anybody. And those lies, we could have talked about a list. Like the enemy doesn't want you to think that there's any hope or there's a way out or there's anyone that feels like you do.
Right.
And to combat that, I would say, like we talk about Fountain Spring Stories on YouTube channel. Like maybe sometimes it's just hearing somebody else's story, and that's a great way to go to that YouTube channel. And maybe on a lunch break or whenever you have a spare moment, check out a story of someone that maybe went through a loss or is grieving or just went through struggles that you've gone through, and being able to identify, oh, they went through that, or, oh, they did that in that moment, and I never tried that, or I never thought about it that way. And I think when we can bring that new perspective into the situation, how powerful that can be, because then you're not letting the enemy remind you that you're here. God's like, okay, listen, you're not alone in this, and this is what somebody else tapped into, and that's a powerful reminder.
Well, and I think one of the books I would kind of recommend in this time, Winning the War in Your Mind. I recommend it, but it's a book I keep recommending because regardless of where you're at in life, there's always going to be this battle in your mind of where God wants to take you, but also you've got Satan taking you a different direction. You've got yourself sometimes getting in the way of all that. And so you got to know, okay, how do I win this war?
Yeah. No, you and I have had that conversation on that book, and just I think that rut conversation, like they get wagon wheels, and like eventually, no longer can you go down that same rutted road. You've got somebody had to blaze off and make a new road that allowed people to travel safely and not get stuck continually in the same path. And I know that sometimes that is the hardest thing, like believing that there can be a new path.
Yes. Well, and I would say like Job's story, if you just read it, like that is a story all about grief. And it's got interesting details to it. All things that it's like, you're going to like, wait, God allowed some of this. And because God is sovereign, he is over all this, and he can sometimes, but it's not that he wants all this stuff to happen. He was just a point. But then Job has to wrestle through the grief. And you see him do it in a way that God goes, this is how I would like people to wrestle through grief.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, he's kind of frustrated with God, being like, God, where were you? What are you doing? And God reminds him.
Yeah.
And then you see Job overcome those moments. And I think those are just a lot of, sometimes you could read the Bible and be like, oh, okay. But like, well, hold on. He lost his whole family.
Yeah.
He lost his health for a time. Yeah. And he was just, God, I don't get this. And his friends come, and his friends are like, so you must have done something evil. Yeah. You must have done something sinful. Yeah. And it's no, like it was just, because I do think in the midst of grief, sometimes we ask that question. Yeah. Oh, did I? Yep. I must have sinned. Mm-hmm. I must have done something wrong. And I don't, those things aren't connected.
Yeah. Sometimes those things just happen. And I think with Job's story, like, because I listened to a podcast a little bit ago, like Job never doubted that God was God. Correct. He questioned, but he never doubted that God was God, which at the end of the story, when God reprimands the friends, and he says, now have Job pray for you. Yep. Because he never doubted that I was God. And trust me. And
he wasn't questioning. He just wanted God to answer for himself. Yep. He's like, God, you're in charge of this. Why did you do this? Why did you allow this? Yeah. And I think those are legitimate questions. Yeah. And so some of it, it's like, just be like, for me, it goes back to that theology, because sometimes you just wrestle through things. Mm-hmm. Yep. I know for me personally, losing a friend to a plane accident and just being like, wait, what? He's just flying home to see his family. Him and his wife flying home to see his family for Christmas, passes away. Yeah. And I'm just like, what in the world is going on here? God? Yeah. Like, it seemed like they had so much potential, so much all this, but it's like a potential of, hey, they're going to do this. Yeah. And 20-somethings. And just stuff that you wrestle with, but then also being like, well, hold on. They're with the Lord. That's going to be better than anything here.
Yeah. And I guess I had an early start to this just because in between my sister and I, my mom lost a kid, so there are times I wonder, hey, what would 46-year-old Elena look like? Or who would she be? Yeah. But I am always amazed by my mom and just the reality of her ability to have walked through that, but now to share. And it doesn't come right away. And nobody expects you to be like, hey, right away, I'm ready to share about the hope and the promise that's to come. No, you work through that. But on the other side of that hard, if you're willing to trust God in it, God's going to use it. Yep. And but again, that takes a process. Yep. It doesn't, but grief comes in so many forms in so many ways, and it comes so unexpectedly.
Well, and I think that unexpected one is sometimes the toughest part, but you go like, I lost a friend, but I also had grief of just, oh man, job that I thought I had didn't work out. And it's just like, you have those moments too. Yeah. And so you start questioning like, did I do something wrong?
Is it me?
Is it me? And that becomes a form of grief and working through your own mental hurdles and some of that. And letting go of something, like it could be something that was really good, like me stepping out of student ministry. There's grieving within that.
What do I do now?
Just started something new. And so that's why I say just grief is going to be something in your life through the good and through the frustrating and bad. And so that's learning how to do it in a way that's going, okay, do I lean into God or do I try to just go solve it all by myself?
And I think it's dangerous just in that vein. Like we make assumptions that we're not strong enough or there's no way we could do this, but yet with the help of God, all things are possible, and we don't know our own strength if we're willing to tap into His to get us through the situation, because you can't do grief in your own strength. You mentioned it. Like you need a counselor, you need a pastor, you need and just where are you tying yourself to? Because if you're tying yourself to things that aren't going to hold fast, you're going to find yourself just out of bounds really quick. So the importance of really tying yourself down and saying, okay, no matter where this takes me, I know where I'm anchored. I know that I'm not going to get swept away in this. Right. And that's a beautiful thing.
Well, and that's what I think of, like, just the analogy. Think you have an anchor. Think of it, you're in a lighthouse in the midst of this. You go through the storm, but if you make it through the storm and you see where you land and how beautiful it is, it can be a whole, like, man, I didn't know we'd ever make it here. Yeah. But it's good to be here. Yep. There's some of like, I hate what it took. Yeah, but I wouldn't change it.
Absolutely.
Because of what I learned along the way. No. And that's the part I'd be like, all the things that I've walked through, it's like, some of the things I don't want that to happen. Yeah. Yep. But I go, it did. Yeah. And I don't want it to be a defining thing. If anything, be like, I've learned something, learned how to approach it differently, and I'm now better at handling whatever life may come at me.
Absolutely.
And
it
I
only
think
prepares
grief
us.
actually helps us do that.
It does. It does. Because, man, the way in which we live life, we want it to be this easy road that just makes sense and all comes together in this nice package. Mm-hmm. But man, those moments stretch us and literally begin to define who we're becoming and what we're capable of. And I think it's pretty powerful. So, man.
Yeah. And I would encourage you, if you're struggling with grief right now, like, you've got pastors who would love to meet with you and connect with you. You've got a church who's got a lot of different opportunities out there, whether it's, we talked about divorce care, but there's also Celebrate Recovery, which is an awesome ministry of helping people in so many different things. It's not just addiction. It's so much more than that. Helping people walk through divorce, helping people recover from whatever the issue may be.
And it really begins, are you willing to take a step? And just listen, this isn't a commitment to be there for the rest of your life, but you got to start somewhere. You got to be willing to take that first step. And here we are. Take that first step. Be encouraged. So,
and we've got a group of counselors we'd recommend. So you've got resources at your disposal. But I think what this podcast is all about, you got to be willing to take that next step.
Absolutely. Well, hey, we love you. We'll see you next time. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.